Hello everyone, today we will talk about synchronization of stats of the player that might change, but doesn't change as often as position, for example. So we have our player here, test KDS, which is level 2, so he has around about 125 HP, so his HP bar looks like this. And we have a built version of our game here, and this controls the player KDS Best, which is level 10 and has a lot of more HP. Currently the game is configured to give you 100 max HP per level up, which isn't the game design for the future, but for me to test synchronization of this stat, it's actually pretty mandatory to have something which changes. That's why we also see the level of the other player now. So when I go teleport back to the top and get the quest is still very overpowered configured. So when I give the quest, I level up pretty much, my HP changes. And if we check again for what the other player sees, for him now our level has updated and our max HP also has been updated. In the next near future, we will make some dead zones where the player lose HP or might even die, and then we do some respawning mechanism and everything. But this video took me quite a while to make, because I needed to make a decision which I didn't took very lightly, and let's talk about that decision. First of all, as a small side note, my network engine, which I use, had a major bug in MTU detection. The problem is we sent unreliable messages, and the messages got too big. Even though I'm connected to basically a loopback device, my MTU was 500 or something. MTU is the maximum size of one package which can travel over the network, and usually MTU of the internet is round about between 1300 and 1600. And for a loopback device, it is normally quite huge and not 500 bytes. The reason for that was quite simple. When we look at the MTU handler of our network engine, there was some code which processes the MTU package, which was quite old, because before I changed that, the MTU package had an index value instead of the actual MTU value as an int. I changed that, but I had one check here which checks against the index value, and the index value was too huge and to furthermore not get exploited or everything. The MTU package is dropped, and that's why the lowest configurable MTU is always picked. So this is fixed now, just as a small side note, but let's talk about this heavy decision that we had to do. The problem is player state. In this regard, we have it on multiple stages. We have, for example, the position of the player within the map service, which totally makes sense because the map service basically splits the map into different partitions. And the position of the player basically manipulates in which partition the player is in, and also in which partitions the player is interested in. Because the player is always interested in its own partition and the 8 partitions around him. And there's some mitigation for players if they are between 2 partitions and run back and forth. Deregistration of those partitions around him basically is a little further away, so that when he jumps back and forth between 2 partitions, it's not constantly registered, deregistered. But in a nutshell, it works like that. So this makes sense that the player position is handled and tracked by the map service. So currently we have our level, managed by the character service, which also makes sense because the character service has everything character related. The decision now is max HP and HP. Is it handled by the map service? Is it handled by the character service? Or do we make a new service which basically handles everything? Also, a candidate could be combat service, which basically is the combat of the player. As you can see, there are many options available to us where we put this information, and everything has advantages and disadvantages. One thing pretty fast got clear for me. I need to send the state, which is the level, max HP and HP of the current player, to everyone that is registered and interested in the player. So the only service capable of doing that for now is the map service. So what we did, we added these parameters to the map service. So the map service now knows every player, their level and HP. And when it sends a player state, it will add those values to the player state. Let me go to that point real fast. It's in world management. And here every character is basically saved. This class player world management is singleton for each instance of our map service, which is not true for the map workflow. The map workflow is instanced per player. And since this is a global value, because this is for the whole map and not just for one registration, it makes sense to have it in the player world management so that we don't copy the value for each player, which will take quite a lot of memory. So this service now knows everything about the player, and he gets the state via our Redis. When a player changes with its HP and everything, then this information is actually updated. And if a player disconnects, then he got removed from the list. And every time we receive a state, you can follow this when you go to the variable, right click, find all references. This is one of the most used tools by myself to analyze some code. We find everything related to characters. And we can see here in onPlayer disconnected, we check if the player is still in the list, because it might happen that this function is called multiple times. I don't know why, but better safe than sorry. And then we unregister for updates on this player character stats and remove it. Then when we receive a new player state, we check if we have those information of the player. It could happen that the character service, which holds the state at the end, is a little bit slower in informing us about the state of the character than actually player states coming in. We still want to display the player position as soon as we can. So if we don't have the data yet, then we will read the data from the database directly, so that we always have data available, which might be some of the latest state. And even if it's wrong, it will get updated really, really fast. So then we cache the state of the character that we read from the database, and then we subscribe for message updates from the other service who's handling the character states. And every time the stat changes, we will update it in the characters list, which, like I said, is singleton for this instance of the map service, so the memory is not used too much. And every time when we get a player update message from the client, when the client says my position has changed and everything, The client can inform us about HP and max HP change, but we will override it with what the server knows. So even if the client changes values, it doesn't matter because the server will always override the stats with its knowledge about the stats. And then we save it into our map world state. And then everyone who's partitioned and one knows this information will read it from the world stats from the whole map and will send to their players the values that are needed. On Unity side, we had some issues with the HP bar because I changed the background to some bluish to see a little bit better how the HP bar is working. So we fixed the little things in the shader. The server isn't running. So we fixed some little things in the shader to make it look correct. And if you can check out the div if you want to, it's nothing too serious. It's just moving around some boxes. And if you can leave a question in the comment section if you want to know more about the HP bar shader. I made an early version of it in a video already, but this is an updated version which looks way better and cleaner. But not too much has changed. So Unity basically just updates the remote player and player with the data provided by the backend and displays it. So nothing too new or fancy there. I decided that I want to have every stat that is character related be managed by the character service. The reason for that is that the combat service is just managing currently cooldowns and skill usage of the player. And I really don't want to bloat this service up with some more stat modifications and everything. Currently it's really just, can he cast a spell? Is the enemy too far away? Is the cooldown fine? If that's the case, then we cast a spell. That's everything the service is currently doing. And I want to keep it at this domain, and managing HP would be more suitable for the service name maybe, because it's then the full combat instead of just skill management. But still, there is a principle which is the first part of the solid principles. If you are interested in how to make good and clean code, the solid principles is basically one of the first things you will learn. And the first principle is called single responsibility. So each service should have one responsibility and not more. This is basically quite loose to interpretation, but for the combat service, currently it's just managing skills and cooldowns. Let's keep it that way. For the character service, on the other hand, it's also managing currently how the player will look like, but it also had on XP, and it also manages already the level of the player, and most likely HP and max HP and everything is also related to the level. So it was natural to put it in here. My problem with that solution in the beginning, when I was thinking about this project, this problem, was I don't want to communicate over to the map service from the character service that the stats have changed. The reason for that is that the character service currently works really isolated. So when something changes, it will write it to the database, and if one player is interested in stats and everything of another player, it could read those from the character service, because the character service on the first instance was just designed to save how the player will look like, which eyes, which color he had picked. But I added the level mechanic in here, which also increases the scope of this service, and then it totally makes sense to put every stats in here. There could be its own character stats service, which just holds the stats of the character, which would be a very fine decision. And I think honestly it might be even cleaner. But I think the scope of the character service to hold every stats related to the character is not breaking single responsibility. That's where I said that it is always loose interpretation, and you can always say the scope got too big or the scope is fine. So it's basically some kind of experience that is needed to make this decision. And this were really the decision process on my side was, do I want to put it in a map service? Basically not, because the map service is already pretty complex, but I want the stats sent by the map service to the players because it's the only one who knows what partitions the players is registered and which players need to be informed that an update has happened. So the read from client side was from map service was right away pretty simple for me, the decision that I want to propagate it via the map service. But who handles the data? That was the biggest question. And for a long time I was thinking about creating its own service for the player stats. But since the level up mechanic was already in the character service, we just improved that. But in the future, I don't know if we might put it out in its own service. We will have to see. But as you can see, it's not a simple decision. It's not a black and white decision. It's more like gray. You can do it A, you can do it B. It would be totally fine to do it in combat service. Totally also makes sense. It's no easy decision. The reason why it could also be part of combat service is that the combat highly depends on the stats. Currently, the character service will update the combat service here when an on stats update comes in. The stats will be updated because for damage calculation and everything, the stats are needed. So this is basically values which are needed across over the whole backend, and this is what makes this decision tough. At the end, developing everything was quite easy. We had already a class entity stats, which had most of the values that we were talking about currently, and there were some values which weren't before in entity stats, which I moved them. That's why the diff in Git looks so big, because everything that was dot level now is dot stats dot level, which doesn't change the logic behind that, but I wanted to have a class for all stats so that I can send around this class instead of manipulating or making a message which got sent around more complicated. Currently we have then an update character message, I guess, which just has entity stats, and before that it would have level in here and everything, and so we have this isolated in one class which stats are propagated to other services, which is a good thing to do because most likely other things like enemies in the future or props and everything also have those stats. This is everything we did currently, and which gives us the opportunity to solve one of the most complex things that we will come across, which is having data in one service, which a lot of other services are interested in, including the client. And if we solve this one pretty fine, and if this one is solved, we can basically every problem which comes from a data point of view to us will be solved like this. We still need to make a decision where to put the data, who's manipulating the data, and who is communicating the data to the client. But still, everything else is always the same thing for the backend now. I look forward to making dying and respawning, which will be the next video. And then, hopefully, soon we will see some enemies that we can combat against. I wish you all a great weekend. I want to thank my patron Julian for supporting this channel. Hit the subscribe button. Bye.